So I'm sitting here in my car, and it's Friday, just finished up another shift, and I ended up going to the grocery store. Now, afterwards, I'm looking at my bank account. Now, I'm not oblivious as to what's going on with the world in general, because there's a lot going on. But I realized something that's painfully true for someone like me. Look, I don't even live in the middle class. Technically, I live in the Rust Belt, a place that's supposed to be the last refuge for affordability in this country. But I'm not living the life. I'm earning what I came to call a survivor's wage, working in a dream killer's job. And I think it's time for a real American audit, because the math for me, it's not mathing anymore. And I know I'm not the only one that's feeling this. That's why I'm doing this video. Because, look, we've been told to work hard, to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, just to hustle a little bit more. But what happens when you're already working 65 to 80 hours a week and you're still barely above water? What happens when freedom becomes a luxury you literally cannot afford to buy? But let's talk about the reality of being an American in 2026. The experts on TV, they're going to tell you the economy is robust. They're going to point to the GDP growth of 2.2%. They're going to say how the unemployment is so low it's down to like almost 4%. But honestly, I think that's a macro lie covering up the micro nightmare we're living in. To live comfortably today, and by comfortably, I mean by the 50-30-20 rule. 50% for your needs, 30% for those wants, and 20% for your future. You need to make six figures. Now, in some states, that number is like 120,000. But here in the affordable Rust Belt, it's still about 85, 90,000. But the median income for the average full-time worker is still stuck between 45 and 55,000. Look, that's not a gap, that's a canyon. And most of us are being told to jump that canyon while carrying 2 full-time jobs on our backs. And I want to talk about this Rust Belt infrastructure tax. Look, they say it's cheaper to live here, right? But my mortgage, it's only low because of the infrastructure around here. It's crumbling. My heating bill in the winter is basically a ransom payment to a utility company that keeps raising my rates while their service tends to get worse. Now, I have to own my car because there's no public transit around here. And have you seen the prices of cars lately? The average car payment in America is now over $800 a month. I want you to think about that. $800 a month is what a mortgage used to be like 10, 15 years ago. By the time I pay for the privilege of being able to drive to my job, look, I've already lost a day's wages. So, we're being nickel and dime for the basic tools of survival. And then we have the healthcare trap. Now, this is one that really gets me because, look, I've wanted to work for myself for a long time. I'm trying to start some remote businesses, and I'm trying to build something of my own. But in this country, healthcare, it's a chain that's going to keep me at my desk that I really don't care to work for. Now, if I go out on my own, I face what I'm going to call the entrepreneurship tax. Premiums are spiking even another 10% this year. And the deductibles, oh my God, they're like $8,000, $9,000, $10,000. Look, that means before my insurance pays for a single thing, I gotta earn an extra $15,000 to $20,000 of just pure profit just to cover my worst case scenario. That's not a safety net, that's a hostage situation. Look, every other developed nation, medical bankruptcy is basically non-existent. But here in America, it's 500,000 families a year losing their homes, their cars, their sanity because of a medical bill. The pursuit of happiness is impossible when you're stuck in the pursuit of survival. And there's a term for this that makes some people uncomfortable, but let's be real. It's wage slavery. Look, you aren't free when you don't have a choice. Look, they tell us no one wants to work anymore. No, nobody wants to accept a bad deal. Nobody wants to agree to entropy. In life, look, you're either growing or you're decaying. And the deal America is offering the working class right now is a deal for decay. They expect you to show up with a regulated nervous system. Look, when they come in, you come in, they want you smiling, well-rested, and sharp. But they don't pay you enough to afford the food, the sleep, the peace of mind required to be doing all those things. And if you work 10 hours a day, and you commute too, and you have to do your own laundry, your own dishes and cooking, the lawn care, shoveling, when do you do the rest of this? And when do you just exist as a human being? Now, we're all being called lazy because we don't have the energy to clean our homes after being juiced up for 100% of our life force. A lot of you, you're not actually lazy. You're just being harvested and exploited. And people my age, we get lost in this process. And we've monetized the whole village, okay? The community support that used to be a natural part of being a human has been stripped and sold back to us. Look, you need to talk to someone because you're stressed out. Well, now you got to pay a therapist. You need someone to watch your kids. Well, you got to pay $40,000 a year for a corporate daycare. Look, we pay for the village now, and it's a pay-per-play model. Look, the Rust Belt used to be famous for community, porch culture, neighbors helping neighbors. Now, everyone's inside exhausted or working their second shift. We've fragmented the society and turned it into a consumer market. Even building a family has a price tag that's out of reach for a single person just making $50,000, okay? For many, the only way to survive is to technically co-op, meaning having 3 roommates just to split the price of eggs in the internet. And look, that's not progress, that's a return to feudalism. And I see in the comments, I see the older generation saying, well, I made it work. Okay, well, guess what? What did you give up? What was the price of your house compared to your wage in 1980 versus now for these younger kids? In 2026, a house in the safe neighborhood was 7 or 8 times your median salary. In the 70s, it was only 2 to 3 times. And don't tell me that I'm not working hard enough when the goalposts have literally been moved to a different stadium. Now, we have entered the age of Neo-Feudalism, okay? Look, not many people own their own homes. Why? Because the banks do. We don't own our own cars because the finance companies do. We don't even own our own time because the employers do. Look, we're told to be grateful for security while the dollar is devaluated every single day. The middle class is intentionally being squeezed, obliterated, because a desperate population is a lot easier to control. And when you're too tired to participate in those politics or pay attention to what's going on, or too broke to start a business, or people to pay attention to the people that are on top. So what's the solution? Step away if you got to get mad, because you know what? We have to stop blaming ourselves for not hustling enough. Look, trust me, the grind culture, it's a lie. It's a psychological tool to make you feel like your poverty is a personal failing instead of a systemic design. And we need to demand like some sort of new social contract, because we're not asking for the world. Look, we're asking for just doing one job, okay? One job that pays for the roof over our head, that pays to fill the pantry. One job that includes healthcare. Overall is a right, not a luxury. One job that leaves enough at the end of the day to actually be a parent to your children, a friend, or a human being. That used to be the baseline for the American dream. Now, in 2026, it's considered radical demands. Look, if I wanted to live and not just survive, if that's being radical, maybe it's time everybody gets a little radical. Look, if you're watching this and you're sitting in your car like I am and you're staring at the steering wheel wondering how you're going to make it next month, because you know what? You're only one small thing away. Look, it's not your fault. You're not lazy. And you're not a failure. You're a survivor in a system that wasn't built for you to win. We need to stop pulling the ladder up behind us, guys. We need a little empathy. We need to look out for our fellow workers here, because a nation isn't a flag, or it's not a fireworks show on the 4th of July. Look, a nation is a community of people. And if the community is suffering, while you have some top 1% enriching themselves beyond human comprehension, and then the nation, that's now failing. So let's start an audit, a real one. And now let's start talking about wage slavery. Let's talk about the survivor's wage. Hey, you know what? Drop your story in the comments down below. Let people know they're not alone, because I know I'm not alone. You're watching this right now. And because once we all realize we're in the same boat, maybe we can start deciding where this boat's going. All right. Thanks for listening to me rant. I'm going to go home and try finding 5 minutes of peace before I do this all again tomorrow. So, hey, drive safe, and I'll see you in the next one.